Hey guys, tonight we step back into a world without paper, pens, or even the faintest idea of a notebook. You're standing barefoot on the muddy banks of the Euphrates, where the air hums with the sound of insects and the weight of something brand new. Writing hangs quietly over the landscape. The ground is soft beneath your toes, the same clay that will soon become the world's first canvas. You can almost feel the future pressing itself into the mud. You probably wouldn't survive this place very long, between the heat, the wild dogs, and the lack of air conditioning, but for now, you're safe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is thick with river mist and the smell of silt. You crouch beside a group of men working in near silence, each one shaping a lump of clay into a small flat tablet. Their fingers move with the careful rhythm of habit, smoothing edges, trimming corners, leaving faint lines where their nails drag through the wet surface. The clay is cool, soft, and pliable, an ancient miracle of earth and water. One of the men gestures for you to come closer. His hands are stained with river clay, and his eyes are bright with the kind of calm focus that comes from hours spent repeating the same motion. He holds up a thin reed, freshly cut from the marsh. The tip has been sliced at an angle, forming a flat wedge. This, he seems to say without words, is how thought becomes visible. You take the stylus between your fingers. It's light, almost fragile, yet there's something powerful about it. When you press it into the tablet, it leaves a small wedge-shaped mark, clean and satisfying. The clay gives just enough resistance to make it feel deliberate, but not so much that it pushes back. You press again, changing the angle slightly, and now two wedges meet at a point. You've just made a sign. You don't know what it means, but somewhere, someone will. That's the strange thing about this moment. It feels both impossibly ancient and startlingly human. You're watching language shift from breath to touch, from sound to texture. Historians still argue whether this invention was a slow evolution of tally marks or a sudden leap born of bureaucracy. Either way, this moment changes everything. A scribe nearby hums softly as he works, dipping his reed into a small bowl of water to keep it from sticking. The tablet he's making isn't for art or poetry, it's an accounting record. The temple wants to know how much barley was delivered this season. The numbers must be exact. Civilization, it seems, was built on paperwork long before paper even existed. The tablet beside you is drying in the sun, edges curling slightly as moisture escapes. Once hardened, it'll last for thousands of years. Fire, ironically, makes it even stronger. A flood could erase a city, but a single fired tablet might outlive the walls that once surrounded it. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you realize this might be why archaeologists love clay so much. It doesn't crumble easily. You glance down at your own attempt. Uneven wedges, some too deep, others barely visible. The scribe chuckles, takes your tablet, and smooths it flat again with a damp thumb. Try again, his smile seems to say. You do. And somehow the repetition feels hypnotic, like a lullaby written in mud. The reed stylus itself is humble, but its design is genius. The ancient Sumerians didn't invent metal nibs or fancy inks, they had reeds, and they made them work. Some scribes sharpened their tips to fine points, others split them slightly to hold traces of clay. Each stroke, each angle, created a unique wedge pattern, an alphabet of geometry. The word cuneiform comes later, from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge. The name fits perfectly, though the Sumerians never used it. A light breeze drifts across the plain, carrying the smell of drying mud and distant fires. You imagine the countless tablets scattered through the city, stored in jars, stacked in temples, hidden in archives. Messages, contracts, hymns, love letters, whole lives pressed into clay. And you can't help but smile at the thought that somewhere out there, an ancient scribe probably complained about hand cramps just like a modern typist. One tablet catches your eye. It's covered in small, tight rows of marks, but unlike the others, it has a tiny drawing of a fish at the corner. The scribe explains, through a series of gestures, that it's his personal mark, a signature of sorts. You realize that even in this early age of bureaucracy, people wanted to leave a trace of themselves, something more than just the words. Historians still debate whether these first scribes were revered scholars or merely bureaucratic clerks churning out grain inventories for temple accountants. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. To their communities, scribes were both servants and magicians, capable of capturing speech, preserving thought, and speaking across time. You get the sense that they understood how fragile memory was and how writing could make it last just a little longer. As the sun begins to dip, the color of the clay changes from dull gray to glowing gold. The scribes line up their finished tablets, careful not to smudge the fresh marks. A boy carries them to a sheltered alcove where they'll dry overnight. Tomorrow, if they've hardened properly, they'll be stored in baskets. If not, they'll be smoothed down and reused. Recycling, you think, isn't such a modern idea after all. You wander through the settlement as the sky deepens into amber and violet. Around you, life continues. Potters shaping vessels, weavers threading looms, children chasing goats. Yet it's the scribe's quiet persistence that feels most profound. They don't hunt or build or trade, but they create permanence out of impermanence. Their tools are nothing more than river reeds and handfuls of mud, and yet those tools will outlast empires. A fringe theory whispers through your memory. Some researchers claim that the first writing wasn't for trade at all, but for magic, for invoking the divine through symbols that carried power beyond sound. They point to the earliest pictographs of gods and spirits, etched beside the numbers. Whether that's true or not, the idea has a sleepy sort of charm. You can almost imagine a priest scribe squinting at his tablet, wondering if the gods read Sumerian. You return to the riverbank, the day's light fading to a soft gray. The reeds rustle gently in the breeze, their tips catching the last rays of sunlight. You pluck one and run your thumb along its length, feeling the smooth surface and the faint ridges beneath. It's just a plant, ordinary, fragile, temporary. And yet, when cut and shaped, it becomes a bridge between minds separated by millennia. You sit down, press the reed once more into a fresh patch of clay, and leave your own small mark. It doesn't matter what it means. The simple act feels timeless. The clay cools under your touch, the air hums with the evening chorus of insects, and the world slows into that quiet, heavy calm that comes just before night fully arrives. In the distance, someone is still working by torchlight, the flicker of flame glinting off the damp clay. You can hear the soft, steady tap-tap-tap of reeds against tablets, an ancient rhythm, soothing and patient, almost like rain. It's easy to imagine drifting to sleep to that sound, the gentle percussion of humanity's first words taking shape. You lean back, watching stars emerge above the river's mirror surface. Somewhere beneath your feet, countless tablets lie buried, some broken, some whole, all still whispering the same simple truth. The urge to remember is as old as the clay itself. The next morning begins with the faint scent of rain and the sound of something you now recognize, the dry, rhythmic clicking of reeds on clay. You follow the sound through narrow lanes, past houses built of sun-baked mud brick, until you find yourself once again in the scribe's courtyard. The same familiar faces are there, bent over tablets, their fingers stained the color of wet dust. Today, though, their work sounds different, sharper, faster, more confident. The tap-tap-tap of styluses rises and falls like rainfall on stone, and you realize you're hearing one of the first symphonies of civilization, the music of cuneiform. The word itself, cuneiform, comes much later, of course. The Sumerians never called it that. They just pressed marks into clay. But you can feel the pattern emerging now, how angled wedges, when arranged just so, form meaning. The stylus doesn't draw lines, it leaves impressions. Each wedge is like a heartbeat pressed into the clay, marking the pulse of thought itself. A scribe beside you tilts his tablet, squinting at it in the soft light. He's young, with hair tied back by a strip of linen. He explains, through gesture, that each wedge has direction: vertical, horizontal, diagonal, and that their combinations can mean head, water, or king. The difference between one word and another might be as subtle as a shift in angle. You try to imagine learning this code, memorizing hundreds, eventually thousands of symbols, and realize just how patient these people had to be. Historians still argue whether cuneiform began as pure pictographs or whether it evolved directly from simple tally marks. The oldest examples are both, pictures that mean things and marks that mean numbers. But here, in this courtyard, you can see the language shifting. The signs are becoming abstract, their meanings more flexible. A drawing of a fish once meant fish, but now it might mean food or even abundance. The symbols are slipping free of pictures and becoming something more, thoughts made portable. You sit beside the scribe and listen to the faint rasp of his reed. It's a soothing sound, like gentle scratching in sand. Each press leaves a neat triangle of shadow. He moves with unhurried precision, pausing only to wet the stylus when the clay begins to dry. Occasionally, he leans back and blows softly across the surface, clearing dust. The air smells faintly metallic, like rain on baked earth. You wonder how long a single tablet takes to finish. An hour? 2? The scribe shrugs when you ask, as if time doesn't really apply here. The work isn't measured in minutes, but in focus. The strokes must be perfect. Once pressed, they can't be erased without starting over. Still, some scribes have tricks, scraping the clay smooth again, or pressing a wet finger to blur a mistake. It's ancient proofreading, tactile and immediate. Nearby, another man works on something larger, a legal document, judging by its size and the careful spacing. You glance closer and see faint guidelines etched into the clay, helping him keep the rows straight. Even now, people still draw faint pencil lines before writing neatly on paper. Some habits never change. As you watch, he finishes a line and sets his stylus aside. Then, with a small, deliberate motion, he smooths the tip against his palm and checks it for wear. Reeds don't last long. The constant pressing dulls their edges, and a blunt stylus can ruin an entire tablet. That's why scribes keep bundles of reeds close by, each one cut at a slightly different angle for different kinds of strokes. A master scribe, you realize, isn't just a writer, he's a craftsman of tools. One of the elder scribes, with a beard streaked white like river foam, beckons you over. He shows you a clay tablet that's been fired, hardened in a kiln until it rings faintly when tapped. This one is meant to last. He runs his finger over the ancient text, the wedges deep and sharp even after years of handling. Once in the fire, his expression seems to say, words become eternal. You hold the tablet in your hands. It's heavier than you expected, dense, solid, with a surprising warmth that lingers from the sun. These were no fragile scrolls. They were built to survive time, floods, and even the fall of empires. Ironically, the great fires that destroyed ancient libraries sometimes saved their contents, baking tablets into permanence. What was meant to erase, instead, preserved. There's a certain poetry in that, the fragility of clay redeemed by flame. You imagine some ancient librarian watching in horror as a city burns, never realizing that the fire would make sure his words endured for 4,000 years. One of the apprentices laughs softly as you try to copy a line of text. Your wedges lean at odd angles, too shallow, too close together. The result looks more like the world's first shopping list written by someone in a hurry. The elder pats your shoulder with gentle amusement. Everyone starts like this, his smile says. Even kings' sons must learn their lines. That's another thing. Scribes were often elite, their education long and rigorous. In Mesopotamia, becoming a scribe meant years in the eduba, or tablet house. There, young students practiced copying proverbs and lists over and over until their fingers cramped. You can almost hear a teacher muttering the ancient equivalent of, "Write it again, neatly this time." Some tablets from these schools still survive, full of student errors and bored doodles, proof that teenagers have always been teenagers. You run your hand along the drying rack, where rows of tablets rest in the sun. Each one tells a story, some practical, others poetic. One records barley rations for temple workers. Another lists offerings to the goddess Inanna. Yet another describes a boundary dispute between farmers. Bureaucracy, religion, and gossip, all immortalized in clay. But among them lies something unexpected, a small tablet with no apparent purpose, just random clusters of signs. You point at it, curious. The elder chuckles, explaining that it's a practice piece, a doodle of sorts. Scribes sometimes tested their tools this way, pressing nonsense symbols to check the sharpness of their styluses or the consistency of the clay. It's strangely comforting to know that even the inventors of writing had their equivalent of messy notebook margins. Historians still debate how sound entered this silent system, when those wedges began to represent not just objects, but syllables and phonetic values. Some say it happened gradually, as scribes tried to write names or foreign words that pictures couldn't capture. Others think it was a deliberate leap of logic, a creative explosion in human thought. You can almost feel that transition in your fingertips, the moment when a mark stops being just a picture and starts being a sound. The light shifts as afternoon fades. Shadows stretch long across the courtyard, darkening the tablets to a deep brown. The scribes begin to pack up their tools. Each stylus is wiped clean, bundled with others in a strip of woven reed. They cover the drying tablets with a cloth to protect them from dust and insects. It's all methodical, careful, as though the act of closing the day's work is as sacred as writing itself. As they leave, the courtyard grows quiet, except for the distant murmur of the river. You pick up a single reed stylus left behind. Its tip is blunt, its edge worn smooth from use. You hold it to your ear, half expecting to hear the faint whisper of history. And maybe, in some small way, you do. You picture future generations uncovering these same tablets, deciphering the marks, arguing over meanings. What did this word mean? Was it a title, a verb, a mistake? Whole careers will be built on understanding the choices these scribes made today. It's humbling and a little funny to realize that your clumsy practice tablet might confuse a future archaeologist for decades. Night drifts in softly, the stars returning one by one. You stretch your tired fingers, still stained with clay. The air cools, and the last of the reed smoke rises from nearby cooking fires. Somewhere, a scribe's stylus clicks one final time against a half-dried tablet, then falls silent. The first written words of humanity rest quietly in the dark now, etched in wedges, whispered in dust, and waiting to be found again thousands of years later. By the time your journey carries you westward, the air has changed. The heavy clay scent of Mesopotamia fades into the bright, dry breath of Egypt. The sun here is relentless, clean and gold, as though it's been fired in the same kiln as the gods themselves. You follow the river's long green ribbon through the desert, the Nile shimmering like a vein of life. And along its banks, in shaded workshops and temple schools, a new kind of surface is being born. One softer, lighter, and far easier to carry than clay. Papyrus. You first notice it growing thick along the river's edge, tall stalks, green and feathery at the tips, swaying in the hot breeze. The air hums with insects, and the stalks rustle like whispers. To anyone else, it might look like just another marsh plant, but to Egyptian scribes, it is the stuff of memory itself. You watch as two men wade knee-deep into the water, cutting the stalks near their base with curved bronze knives. The cuts are clean, deliberate, practiced. Each stalk is lifted gently onto a raft and floated back toward shore, where others wait to strip and slice it. The inner pith is pale, almost white, with a faint sugary smell. The workers slice it into thin ribbons, careful not to tear them. The motion is almost hypnotic. Slice, peel, lay aside, repeat. A woman seated nearby arranges the strips in 2 perpendicular layers, one horizontal, one vertical, on a smooth wooden board. She hums quietly as she works. There's no glue, just water and patience. She presses the grid beneath a smooth stone, and after a few hours, the plant's natural sap binds the layers together. When it dries, the sheet gleams faintly in the sunlight, golden and firm. She holds it up to you, proud. You run your fingers across the surface, silky, faintly fibrous. The sound it makes under your touch is crisp, like the soft rustle of leaves. Compared to the cool density of clay, this feels impossibly light. You imagine how freeing it must be for a scribe to roll up words, to carry entire stories without needing a wagon. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians invented papyrus purely for convenience or as an act of aesthetic genius. Either way, it's hard not to see the poetry in it. You're led into a shaded room, the floor cool beneath your feet, and there you meet a scribe at work. His tools are few: a slender reed pen, a small palette of black and red pigments, and a roll of fresh papyrus spread across a low table. The air smells faintly of resin and ink. He greets you with a knowing smile and dips his pen into a small jar, swirling it gently. Then, with quiet confidence, he begins to write. The tip of the reed glides across the papyrus, leaving clean, dark strokes that gleam wetly before drying matte. Each mark feels alive, quick, almost playful, as though the symbols themselves are dancing. The black ink is made from soot and gum arabic, a combination that clings beautifully to the fibers. The red ink, used for headings and divine names, is made from ochre. When he switches colors, he does so with care, wiping the nib against the edge of the palette before continuing. You lean closer, mesmerized by the rhythm. The pen moves with an organic grace, curving, looping, connecting. Unlike the angular wedges of cuneiform, hieroglyphs and hieratic scripts flow like the river they were born beside. They feel less carved and more breathed. The scribe pauses occasionally, rolling the papyrus gently to advance the page. The movement is smooth and deliberate. Centuries before scroll wheels and page turns, people already knew the satisfaction of progress measured in motion. He looks up briefly, notices your fascination, and chuckles. You ask by gesture how long it takes to write a scroll. He shrugs lightly and gestures to a sun. A day, perhaps 2, for short texts. Weeks or months for the long ones. Some temple records span meters upon meters of papyrus, rolled tightly like the tail of an endless serpent. You imagine reading one from start to finish and feel a flicker of sympathy for ancient librarians. Historians still debate how far papyrus traveled, whether Egypt guarded its monopoly fiercely, or whether the material spread more freely than legend suggests. The Greeks, later on, would swear that the Egyptians restricted exports to maintain their intellectual advantage. Then again, traders have a way of smuggling ideas, even when borders try to stop them. Maybe papyrus was Egypt's first global export, long before cotton or perfumes. The scribe invites you to try your hand. He cuts a fresh reed for you, splitting the end and sharpening it with a quick, confident twist of his knife. You dip it into the ink, hesitating for a moment before pressing it to the papyrus. The texture resists you at first, then welcomes you in. The line comes out uneven, too heavy in places, too faint in others, but it feels good. The pen hums faintly as it moves, like the whisper of fabric brushing against skin. Your clumsy marks dry quickly, curling slightly as the ink settles into the fibers. The scribe nods approvingly, then gestures toward the roll of completed text beside him. He lifts it, rolls it gently from both ends until the 2 scrolls meet in the middle, forming a neat bundle tied with linen string. Words preserved not in clay, but in the lightest of forms, a memory that could sail across the world. You step outside, blinking against the sunlight. Along the courtyard walls, more scrolls hang to dry, their surfaces glowing pale gold. The smell of reeds and smoke fills the air. A cat whines lazily between the workers, ignoring everyone with practiced superiority. You can't help but think that nothing in Egypt has changed very much. Nearby, a temple apprentice copies lines from an older scroll, his tongue poking from the corner of his mouth in concentration. His teacher watches closely, correcting the occasional stroke. In this way, knowledge moves through generations, not just the words themselves, but the gestures, the rhythm, the exact tilt of the hand. To be a scribe here is to inherit a lineage, a sacred trust. One tablet of wisdom, written centuries later, advises, be a scribe. It saves you from toil and protects you from sweat. The scribe's work is joy. You can almost hear the echo of that message in the calm patience of the man before you. The reed, the ink, the papyrus, each one an extension of his will, quiet and precise. A gentle breeze stirs the hanging scrolls, and they rustle softly like distant applause. The sound is strangely comforting, a dry whisper against the desert heat. It's easy to imagine falling asleep to it, the steady sigh of papyrus leaves brushing together, as if the written word itself were breathing. But even here, perfection is an illusion. One scroll you pass bears smudged lines where ink was too wet. Another shows faint corrections, red dots marking where the scribe began a word incorrectly. Ancient proofreading again, this time in color. The teacher notices your interest and smiles, tapping his temple as if to say, even the gods make mistakes. The sun lowers toward the horizon, casting long golden stripes through the columns. The Nile glows like liquid copper. You walk with the scribes to the water's edge, where they wash their hands and rinse their pens. The used reeds float downstream, turning lazily in the current. You imagine where they might end up, perhaps caught in the reeds again, completing their quiet cycle. And as you stand there, you realize something subtle has shifted. Clay tablets were born from the earth, heavy, enduring, meant to be kept. But papyrus is born of water, light, fragile, meant to move. The change isn't just technological, it's philosophical. A clay tablet demands permanence. A scroll invites flow. The evening call of birds rises from the marshes. The scent of lotus and smoke fills the air. You take one last look at the drying scrolls, golden in the fading light, and you understand. This is no longer about recording trade or tribute. This is about preserving beauty itself, the story of how human thought learned to dance across a page. The night air along the Nile is soft and cool when you return to the scribe's quarters. The papyrus scrolls are safely rolled and stored in reed baskets, the tools cleaned and laid neatly beside the writing table. A faint scent lingers in the air, sweet, smoky, and slightly metallic. You recognize it now, the smell of ink. Tonight, the scribes are mixing a new batch. You settle beside them as they work by the dim glow of oil lamps, their hands moving with slow, sure precision. Ink, after all, is as sacred as the words it carries. Without it, a reed is just a stick, and papyrus just a plant. The magic lies in the mixture. One scribe grinds something black and brittle in a shallow stone bowl. The sound is low and rhythmic, like footsteps on gravel. He adds drops of water and a sticky resin from the acacia tree, stirring until the mixture thickens into a glossy paste. Then he lifts his bowl to the light, tilts it slightly, and smiles. Perfect. The world's oldest ink, soot, water, and tree sap. You lean in to smell it. The scent is deep and earthy, like a campfire after rain. The scribe dips his reed pan into the fresh ink and drags it slowly across a scrap of papyrus. The line that follows is pure black, dense, even, and satisfying. When it dries, it leaves a faint sheen, as though the ink remembers the light it was born from. Historians still argue whether the earliest inks were purely functional or partly spiritual, whether scribes saw themselves as chemists or alchemists. There's no real evidence of ritual here, yet the process feels almost devotional. Each ingredient is measured by touch, not by number. The texture and scent guide the maker more than any written recipe. You ask what happens if the ink goes wrong. The scribe chuckles and points toward a pile of discarded scrolls, ghostly smudges of faded words, victims of too much resin or not enough soot. He picks one up, taps it with his stylus, and the surface flakes slightly. Too thick, his expression says, won't last a century. You realize with a little shiver that he's not wrong. He's thinking in centuries. A second bowl is being prepared nearby, this time for red ink. Instead of soot, they grind red ochre, iron oxide pulled from the desert cliffs. The sound is harsher, more crystalline. The pigment catches the lamplight and glows like embers. When mixed with gum and water, it becomes thick and vivid, the color of sunrise. Red ink is for God's names, headings, or warnings, the color of sacred attention. You dip your finger into it when the scribe isn't looking. It stains your skin instantly, a warm, earthy hue that doesn't wash off easily. You rub it between your fingers. It's grainy, alive somehow. You wonder how many hands across history have worn this same tint. Egyptian scribes, Greek scholars, medieval monks, all of them reaching for the same miracle, color that endures. Another scribe, older and half-blind, gestures toward a shelf lined with small jars. Some are filled with blue pigment, others with green, and one with a faintly shimmering black that looks almost purple. He explains that these are rare: lapis lazuli for blue, malachite for green, and sometimes even powdered beetles for that strange metallic sheen. Each was precious, gathered from deserts and mountains far away. He doesn't use them often, only for special commissions. The cost of a single pot could buy a donkey, maybe two. You find yourself lost in the quiet poetry of it all. The idea that someone crushed a rock from Afghanistan or ground a shell from the Red Sea just to make a color for words, that feels almost absurdly human. It's the same impulse that makes someone today buy the perfect pen for a journal they'll never finish. As the scribes continue their work, the air fills with a gentle chorus of grinding, tapping, stirring. It's not loud, but steady, ritualistic, almost meditative. You realize how intimate this craft is. Ink is made by hand, every drop a fingerprint of its maker. Some mixtures are glossy, others matte. Some fade to brown over centuries, others remain as dark as the day they dried. Entire civilizations can be dated by the chemistry of their inks. The eldest scribe pulls out an ancient jar sealed with wax and cracks it open carefully. Inside, the ink is still liquid, even though it was made decades ago. "The good ones live forever," he murmurs in his native tongue, and you understand him perfectly. He dips his reed and writes a single line across fresh papyrus, smooth, strong, flawless. You half expect it to still be there 1,000 years from now. Historians still debate whether scribes ever experimented with invisible inks, lemon juice, milk, or other organic fluids. A few faint references from later papyri suggest secret writings, messages hidden beneath the visible text. It's tempting to imagine some lovesick apprentice sending forbidden words beneath a layer of official records, trusting that time or heat might reveal them someday. The younger scribes laugh softly among themselves, teasing one another about who mixes the stickiest batch. One accidentally spills a little ink on his robe, and the others erupt in quiet laughter. "Don't worry," the elder says, grinning, "now your words are part of you." You can't help but smile at that. Somewhere in the background, a small cat, the same lazy guardian from the courtyard, pads through the ink bowls, leaving perfect black paw prints across the stone floor. The apprentices freeze in horror. The elder just sighs and lets the cat finish its walk. "Every scroll," he mutters, "has a story." Later, as the night deepens, the scribes store their inks in covered jars and seal them with wax. They clean their palettes, flat strips of ivory or wood carved with shallow wells for each color, and set them beside their pens. The lamp flames flicker low, reflecting in the glossy surfaces of drying ink. You watch as they blow gently on each pot to cool it before covering, the way someone might soothe a sleeping child. You think about how much knowledge is hidden in these small gestures, the balance of gum to soot, the drying time, the ideal consistency for desert air versus river humidity. None of it is written down. It's all muscle memory, passed from hand to hand, from teacher to student, from one generation's fingertips to another's. It's fragile knowledge, the kind that can vanish with a single forgotten habit. You reach for one of the drying palettes. The black ink has settled into tiny, glistening pools. You tilt it slightly, and the surface trembles like water at dusk. In that shimmer, you see centuries of words yet to come. Scrolls, manuscripts, letters, books. The ink you're holding will one day flow through steel pens and digital styluses, but its soul will always be here, in soot and sap. Outside, the crickets have begun their nightly song. A soft breeze drifts through the open doorway, carrying the faint sweetness of the Nile. You can taste the cool air, tinged with the scent of smoke and papyrus. The scribes extinguish the last of the lamps, one by one, until only a single flame remains. It flickers, reflected in the ink jars, multiplying like tiny suns. The elder dips his pen one last time and writes a final symbol, a prayer perhaps, or a note of completion. He sets the pen down, sighs, and looks content. The air feels still, heavy with ink and night. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sound of 1,000 years of pens following this same rhythm. The soft scrape, the faint hiss, the whisper of soot becoming thought. Somewhere in that rhythm, you drift a little, halfway between waking and sleep. The ink still glistens in your mind's eye, black as a moonless river, ready to hold whatever dreams come next. Morning comes slowly over the river plains. Pale light filters through the slats of the workshop, soft and gold, pooling over the table where the tools of a scribe await their daily rhythm. The ink jars rest like small black suns, the papyrus sheets curled and waiting. But before a single mark can be made, the scribe reaches for something humbler, a reed. At first glance, it seems ordinary, a dried stalk, light as air, pale tan with faint green shadows. Yet in the scribe's hands, it becomes something living again. He runs his fingers along its length, feeling for the subtle ridges, the hollow center. Then, with a small copper knife, he slices it cleanly near the end. The sound is sharp and dry, like tearing paper. This is the beginning of a pen, the same kind of pen that once carried the first laws, the first prayers, the first poems of humankind. The scribe trims the tip with slow precision, shaping it into a narrow wedge. The knife moves with practiced care, removing slivers no thicker than a whisper. Then he presses the blade lengthwise to split the tip, allowing ink to flow smoothly. When he finally tests the pen on a piece of scrap papyrus, the stroke it leaves behind is fine and steady, not too dry, not too wet. The reed pen is a perfect paradox, both fragile and enduring. In the hands of a novice, it can splinter easily or scrape the writing surface. In the hands of a master, it glides with elegance, almost singing as it moves. Its whisper is faint but rhythmic, a kind of dry rustle, the quiet heartbeat of civilization itself. You watch as the scribe cuts another pen and another, each slightly different. Some have broader tips for headings, others thin and sharp for detail. He tests each one as though tuning an instrument, discarding those that don't produce the right tone. The rejected reeds pile up like the trimmings of an artist's brush, remnants of practice and perfectionism. Nearby, a younger apprentice frowns over his own pen. His strokes are uneven, blotched in places. The older scribe leans over, smiles, and guides his hand. "It's not the ink that makes the line," he murmurs. "It's the breath." He demonstrates, dipping, pausing, exhaling softly before each mark. You realize then that writing isn't just visual, it's physical. Each line has rhythm, born of breathing and patience. As you listen, the reed pen begins to sound almost alive. It scratches faintly when it's dry, hums softly when it's just wet enough, and hisses when it meets a fresh surface of papyrus. Every page has its own voice, shaped by the texture of the plant fibers and the scribe's hand. The pen is not only a tool, but a translator, turning thought into sound before it becomes word. Later in the day, the scribe takes you to the marshes beyond the city walls, the birthplace of all reeds. The air there is warm and heavy with moisture, buzzing with insects. The reeds sway in thick clusters, their golden tips rippling like hair in the wind. He wades in barefoot, moving slowly so as not to bruise the stalks. With a small sickle, he selects each reed by feel, bending it gently before cutting. He knows which will be soft enough to shape, strong enough to hold ink. Back in the shade, the reeds are left to dry for days, sometimes weeks. Too much moisture, and they'll split. Too little, and they'll crumble. Once they reach the perfect balance, they're cut to size, about the length of a handspan, though no two scribes agree on the exact measure. Some prefer longer pens for elegance, others shorter for control. There are no universal rules here, only the invisible wisdom of tradition. The scribe shows you the small grooves near the grip where his thumb and forefinger rest. Decades of use have smoothed the edges into a gentle shine. You can almost imagine how many words this one reed has seen. The laws of kings, the love letters of merchants, the prayers of farmers, all flowing from the same hollow tube of grass. He dips the pen again and writes a line across a clean page. You notice how he pauses before every stroke, as though the ink itself must settle into thought. The reed squeaks faintly, leaving behind a trail of dark, elegant cuneiform signs. It's hypnotic, the steady rhythm of dipping, pressing, breathing. You feel time slowing down, the present dissolving into something timeless. It's strange to think that every ancient document, every account of a harvest, every hymn to the gods, every story of a flood began this way. Not with inspiration or vision, but with craftsmanship. Before a scribe could write, he had to make his tools. He had to know how to sharpen the pen without splitting it, how to thin the ink without losing its depth, how to read the papyrus grains so the strokes wouldn't tear. Writing was never simply a mental act. It was manual labor. It was intimacy between hand and material. In Egypt, some scribes even named their pens, treating them like old friends. A well-balanced reed could last months, sometimes longer. The best ones were stored carefully, wrapped in linen, and passed down like heirlooms. A pen that had written sacred texts might even be buried with its owner, a companion for the afterlife, still carrying the echoes of the words it once shaped. You wonder what the world must have sounded like in those days. No keyboards, no scratching quills, no typewriters, only the dry rasp of reed on papyrus, the occasional clink of an ink jar, the sigh of a scribe stretching cramped fingers. In that silence, each word was a deliberate act. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. Every mark felt earned. At sunset, when the work is done, the scribes clean their reeds carefully. They rinse the tips in water, wipe them dry with soft cloths, and place them in small wooden cases. Some carry a dozen pens at once, each tuned for a different task. Broad for headings, fine for notes, angled for decorative flourishes. It's a quiet ceremony, unspoken but sacred. You stay behind as the others leave, the scent of ink still heavy in the air. On the table lies one forgotten pen. You pick it up and hold it between your fingers. The balance is perfect, light yet purposeful. You dip it into a pot of ink and test it on a scrap of papyrus. The line it draws is smooth, steady, beautiful. You write a simple mark, just a curve, and feel the soft drag beneath your hand. The reed seems to breathe with you. Every movement produces a faint rhythm, like wind rustling through tall grass. For a moment, you understand why the scribes called it the pen's whisper. It's not just sound, it's a conversation between the world and the words that describe it. You sit back, listening to the silence that follows. The ink dries almost instantly, leaving a faint sheen under the last rays of the sun. You realize that the entire history of written communication from stone tablets to glowing screens, still carries this moment inside it. A hand, a tool, a line drawn carefully in the light. Somewhere beyond the city, reeds sway in the dusk, their hollow stems whispering softly to one another. The same wind that shaped them carries your breath now. And perhaps, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear the quiet rhythm of those ancient pens, the heartbeat of writing itself. The morning air feels softer now, and the light that spills across the room has the honeyed warmth of routine. You've moved forward through centuries, past reeds and papyrus, and into a new age of writing. The air smells faintly of beeswax and olive oil, and the surface before you gleams with a muted golden sheen. You're sitting at a wooden table in a Greek workshop, and in front of you lies one of the most versatile inventions of the ancient world, the wax tablet. It's small enough to hold in one hand, framed in polished wood, with the center filled by a thin layer of dark, smooth wax. You tilt it slightly, and the sunlight glides across the surface like ripples on calm water. The wax is cool to the touch, pliable, not too soft, perfect for scratching words into. You pick up a slender tool from the table beside it, the stylus. The stylus looks simple, but there's a quiet genius in its design. One end tapers into a fine point, perfect for inscribing letters into the wax. The other end is flat and wide, a miniature spatula. When you make a mistake, you simply flip the stylus and smooth the wax back over, erasing your words in an instant. It's the ancient equivalent of the backspace key, except far more satisfying. You press the stylus gently into the wax. It yields with a faint, buttery resistance, leaving behind a clean, sharp groove. The sensation is oddly pleasing, like writing in soft sand. The letters catch the light in shallow relief, neat and temporary. The wax tablet, unlike papyrus, isn't meant for eternity. It's for the fleeting details of everyday life. Lists, notes, calculations, gossip, and reminders. The ancient to-do list. Around you, other scribes, and a few merchants, are bent over their tablets. You hear the quiet, rhythmic clicking of styluses against wax, like rain on wood. A woman across the room is adding up a list of grain shipments. A young apprentice is practicing his letters. One man mutters softly as he writes, perhaps a fragment of poetry. Another, with an air of boredom, doodles a ship in the corner of his tablet. You smile. Some things never change. Wax tablets were the notepads of the ancient world. The Greeks used them, so did the Romans. They were cheap, reusable, and portable. A traveler could slip one into a satchel. A teacher could hand them to students for lessons. In schools, children learned their alphabets by scratching them into wax, then smoothing them out and starting again, over and over, until the motion became instinct. Sometimes, multiple tablets were bound together with leather cords along one edge, creating a small folding book called a codex. You open one now, and the faint creak of the hinges feels oddly modern. Each panel faces another, so the wax surfaces press together when closed, protecting the writing inside. It's not hard to imagine someone jotting down a shopping list, closing the covers, and tucking the whole thing under their arm as they head to the market. The wax itself was usually a blend of beeswax and resin, sometimes tinted black with soot or red with ochre. It had to be just the right consistency, soft enough to write in, hard enough to hold the marks. In colder weather, people warmed their tablets gently by the fire before use. A scribe might hover his hands over it first, letting his body heat soften the wax. There's something charmingly human about that, words literally taking shape through warmth. You lean closer to one of the finished tablets. The lines of writing look crisp, beautiful even in their impermanence. You imagine an ancient clerk recording the day's transactions. Sacks of barley, amphorae of oil, a few copper coins owed. Later, when the account is settled, he smooths it over, and just like that, the words vanish. Historians still argue whether this fleeting nature made wax tablets more personal or less meaningful. Some say it encouraged casual expression, a freedom from the burden of permanence. Others claim it made the written word feel disposable, a temporary convenience rather than an art. Whatever the truth, you can't help but feel the intimacy of the act itself, the closeness between thought, gesture, and erasure. A merchant steps past your shoulder, carrying a pair of linked tablets tied with a cord. He looks proud, the way someone today might show off a sleek new phone. He unties the cord and flips them open, revealing a contract scratched into the wax. Two witnesses lean in to read it, nodding in approval. Once the deal is made, they roll a bit of string through the binding holes and press a seal over the knot, securing it with wax. The document might be erased later, but for now, it holds weight, the kind of authority that comes from shared trust. Later, you step outside into the bustle of an Athenian street. The sound of sandals slapping stone, of vendors calling out, fills the air. A boy runs past, clutching a small tablet, perhaps a school assignment. Behind him, a scholar walks slowly, nose deep in his notes, lips moving as he reviews his work. You realize the wax tablet wasn't just a tool for scribes, it was a tool for everyone. Bureaucrats, students, merchants, lovers, all rely on these simple frames of wax and wood to shape their daily lives. At a nearby stall, you notice something odd. The vendor sells tablets in sets, arranged by size. The smallest ones are no bigger than your palm, meant for short messages or quick figures. The largest ones are nearly the size of a small tray, ideal for longer writings or classroom use. He even sells spare styluses, some made of bronze or iron, others of bone or ivory. The variety feels familiar, like walking into a modern stationery shop. You're tempted to buy one just to feel the weight of history in your hands. The vendor chuckles as he wraps a tablet in cloth. "Careful," he warns, "leave it in the sun too long and you'll lose your thoughts." He's not joking. In the heat of a Mediterranean afternoon, the wax softens easily. A careless touch, a moment of warmth, and the day's writing can melt away. You can't help but imagine the panic of a Roman accountant watching his entire ledger droop into illegibility on a summer's day. But there's beauty in that fragility. The wax tablet reminds you that not every word needs to last forever. Some things, thoughts, lists, passing notes, are meant to fade. In an age obsessed with permanence, the ancients understood something we often forget, that writing can serve the present as gracefully as it serves posterity. You walk back inside as evening settles. The room glows softly in lamplight. A teacher is correcting a student's work, scraping away a clumsy letter with the flat end of the stylus. "Try again," she says gently. The boy smooths the wax, takes a breath, and begins anew. You watch the cycle repeat, mistake, correction, effort, until the lines begin to look clean and confident. There's something deeply soothing about it, the idea that imperfection isn't permanent. On the shelf behind them sits a box of old tablets. Some are smudged, some almost empty of wax, their wooden frames nicked and worn. You pick one up and trace your thumb over the faint impressions still visible beneath the surface, ghost letters that never fully vanished. The wax has hardened with age, preserving the accidental archaeology of daily life. Fragments of words, initials, even a doodle of a bird. Somewhere in the next room, a scribe hums softly as he melts new wax over a tablet, letting it pool and cool. The scent of beeswax fills the air, warm and sweet. It smells faintly like memory. You take your seat once more and pick up your stylus. The wax is smooth, perfect. You press lightly and write a single word, something simple like hello. It feels alive, etched yet temporary. You flip the stylus and smooth it away, watching the surface return to calm perfection. You do it again, slower this time. Write, erase, write, erase. The rhythm becomes meditative. The wax sighs quietly under each touch. For a moment, the whole world seems to exist only here, in the small gestures that turn thought into texture. The sound of styluses scraping, the flicker of lamplight, the faint smell of honey and smoke. In that stillness, the ancient scribe's wisdom feels closer than ever. Writing doesn't always have to shout across centuries. Sometimes it's enough that it whispers for a day. The air is cooler now, heavy with the scent of stone and candle wax. You've left behind the sunlit Mediterranean markets and stepped quietly into the hush of a medieval scriptorium. The walls are thick, the light thin and filtered through narrow windows. Dust motes drift lazily in the golden beams, and somewhere far off, a monk clears his throat before returning to the rhythmic scratching of his pen. This is where the reed gives way to the feather, the reed's elegant successor, and perhaps one of the most iconic tools in all of writing history, the quill. You can hear it before you even see it, that soft, deliberate rasp of quill on parchment. It's not sharp like a stylus on wax, nor dry like reed on papyrus. It's smoother, a gliding whisper that sounds like a sigh through silk. A scribe sits hunched at a slanted wooden desk, a square of parchment pinned before him with small stones. His robes are coarse but clean, his posture rigid. You move closer and watch as he dips a long white feather into an inkwell. The ink clings to the quill's tip in a glossy droplet, then trails down in a thin, steady line as he writes. The words unfold slowly across the page, perfectly spaced, each letter a small act of devotion. He's using a goose feather, the classic choice. Swans, ravens, and even turkeys came later, but the goose was the medieval standard. The quill is elegant yet sturdy, flexible enough to make fine curves, but strong enough to withstand long hours of work. You notice how the scribe holds it, not like a modern pen, but at an angle, resting between fingers and thumb. The curve of the feather arches upward, catching the light like a pale ribbon. Preparing a quill is no simple task. It begins with the feather itself, plucked from the left wing of a bird. Yes, the left. Why? Because most scribes were right-handed, and the natural curve of the feather on that side allowed for better control and visibility. It's the kind of practical detail that only centuries of trial and error could perfect. The raw feather must be cured before it can be used. You watch as an apprentice demonstrates. He heats sand in a small pan until it's almost too hot to touch, then buries the feathers in it. The dry heat hardens the shafts and dries out the natural oils, making them less flexible and more durable. When the quills emerge, they've taken on a faint ivory sheen. The apprentice smiles proudly, but the master shakes his head. Too much heat, and the quill becomes brittle. Too little, and the ink will bleed. Like all crafts, it's an art balanced between patience and precision. Once cured, the scribe cuts the quill's tip with a small knife, a penknife, the ancestor of the very word pen. The cut is clean, sharp, deliberate. He trims the end into a gentle angle, then slices a narrow slit up the middle to channel the ink. Finally, he tests the flow on a scrap of parchment. The result is a thin, graceful line that widens slightly with pressure. The quill flexes and springs back, alive, responsive, eager. You sit beside him and try your hand at writing. The first attempt is awkward. The quill feels light, almost insubstantial, and yet the ink runs fast, too fast. The letters spread into small pools. The scribe chuckles softly and hands you a piece of scrap parchment to practice. Don't force it, he says. Let the quill breathe. You adjust your grip, relax your hand, and try again. This time, the letters glide. You can feel every texture of the parchment, every tiny ridge, every grain. Writing with a quill isn't about controlling it, it's about listening to it. The ink he uses is deep black, almost violet under the light. It's made from iron gall, a mixture of tannic acid from oak galls, iron salts, and gum arabic. The process of making it is half chemistry, half alchemy. The scribe describes how they collect the strange knotted growths from oak trees, crush them into powder, and mix them with water and iron sulfate. The result is an ink that bites slightly into the parchment, darkening as it dries. That's why medieval manuscripts have that rich, enduring black. The ink doesn't just sit on the surface, it etches itself into the page. Historians still argue whether iron gall ink was a blessing or a curse. On one hand, it created manuscripts that have survived for centuries. On the other, it was corrosive. It slowly ate into the parchment over time. Some pages in ancient books are now brittle, pitted, their letters turned to lace. It's strange to think that something meant to preserve knowledge could also destroy it. You smile at the irony. Even ink has a temper. As the day passes, the scriptorium hums with quiet concentration. Each monk works in near silence, breaking only to dip their quills or stretch their fingers. The air smells of parchment, smoke, and faint traces of vinegar from the ink. Occasionally, one of them mutters a prayer before beginning a new section, as though invoking divine patience. You notice that their desks are tilted to prevent ink from pooling, and their sleeves tied back to keep from smudging. Every detail is intentional. You wander among them, reading the half-finished lines. Passages from psalms, legal decrees, illuminated letters filled with gold leaf. The precision is astonishing. Not a single uneven stroke, not a single crooked line. You realize that for these scribes, writing is not just work, it's devotion. Every letter is an offering. And yet, amid all this discipline, you find traces of humanity. In the margins of one page, a small doodle of a cat chasing a mouse. On another, a faint complaint. I am very tired. May this day end soon. Even monks, it seems, were not immune to boredom. There's something comforting in that, the universality of fatigue in the face of repetitive labor. You take a seat again and watch as the master scribe switches quills. He uses a broader one for headings, a finer one for delicate script. He trims them frequently, keeping the edge sharp with quick, practiced cuts. The faint snick of the penknife punctuates the silence like a heartbeat. He looks up and says, "A dull quill writes dull words." You can't tell if it's a proverb or a personal joke. Maybe both. Outside, a bell tolls softly. Time for vespers. The scribes set down their quills, wipe the tips clean, and rest them in small wooden holders. Some tuck them into their sleeves, others slip them behind their ears. The desks empty one by one, leaving behind the faint smell of ink and the whisper of parchment cooling in the air. You linger a moment longer. The scriptorium feels timeless now, suspended between centuries. On the desk before you lies a finished page, the ink dark and perfect. You can see the faint grooves left by the quill, tiny ridges where the feather pressed the words into being. You run your finger lightly over them, feeling their texture. It's like touching thought made tangible. As the candles burn lower, you notice something else, a small feather fragment caught in the ink, delicate as breath. You lift it gently, marveling at how this fragile thing helped preserve the words of empires, poets, and saints. The quill may seem fragile, but it's also enduring. For nearly 1,000 years, it ruled the world of writing. From illuminated manuscripts to royal decrees, from love letters to scientific treatises, all began at the tip of a feather. And in a way, that feels right. The quill, born from a bird, gave flight to human language. You sit quietly in the dim light, listening to the fading echoes of the scribe's work. The faint scratch of quills still lingers in your imagination, a steady, meditative rhythm. Maybe you can still hear it, faint and eternal, somewhere deep in the hush of the room. The sound of thought turning into ink, the whisper of wings on parchment. You're standing before a wall of stone that seems to hum with history. The chisel marks are still visible, deep grooves that catch the sunlight like tiny rivers frozen mid-flow. You run your fingers over them, and the sensation is oddly grounding. Cold, solid, permanent. You think back to the soft reeds and quills from earlier ages, fragile tools meant for words that could be smudged or washed away. But this is language carved into eternity. Stone doesn't forgive. Each letter must be struck with precision and patience. Imagine the scribe now, not the soft-spoken temple apprentice or the quill-wielding monk, but a worker of strength and rhythm. He's bare-backed in the heat, muscles moving like clockwork as he chips away at a slab of limestone. Every clang of the hammer sends a vibration up your arm. The air smells faintly of dust and metal, the kind that lingers in your nose long after you've left. Writing on stone was less about the casual note or love letter and more about declaring, "We were here." Think of the towering obelisks of Egypt or the monumental inscriptions of Persia and Rome. These weren't bedtime doodles, they were state proclamations, royal boasts, prayers to gods, carved so deeply that even millennia of wind couldn't silence them. Historians still argue whether the scribes themselves understood the political power of their work, or if they were simply artisans under command. You can picture one of them quietly etching a king's decree, wondering whether anyone would ever read it again, or if it was all for the gods. You pick up one of the tools left nearby, a bronze chisel, blunt at the edge from years of use. It's heavier than you expect, cold even in the sun. The handle fits awkwardly in your hand, not quite made for comfort. That's because it wasn't meant for hours of delicate script, it was meant for endurance. The companion hammer is shaped like a small mallet, its wooden shaft darkened from sweat and time. Together, they form a conversation of force. The hammer delivers the question, the chisel answers in stone. You squat beside a half-finished inscription, rows of symbols that look both alien and familiar. Maybe it's Akkadian, maybe Greek, maybe an edict from Darius or a prayer to Osiris. You can almost hear the original sound of it, that rhythmic clink, 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 echoing through canyons of time. The letters come alive, not in ink, but in shadow, the way sunlight slips across the grooves. It's strange how something so physical can feel poetic. Across civilizations, the tools changed shape, but never their purpose. The Assyrians favored bronze chisels. The Romans, iron ones sharpened like styluses. Inscriptions could be painted after carving, their letters filled with colored resin or crushed lapis lazuli to make the words glow. Imagine the effect, entire temple walls shimmering with sentences of deep blue under torchlight. You might call it the ancient version of a glowing signboard, except this one took weeks of labor and devotion to make. The process was slow. A single line could take a day or more. You picture yourself trying it, setting the chisel just so, tapping, then stopping to check the depth. One mistake, and the error is forever. No wax tablet to smooth over, no ink to blot. You'd have to start again, by erasing part of a mountain. It's a humbling thought. You start to understand why ancient inscriptions often have such careful spacing and symmetry. They weren't just decorative, they were an act of endurance. A quirky tidbit you might enjoy, some early or mischievous, left graffiti on the very monuments they were carving. Hidden doodles, quick scratches of "I was here" in forgotten corners of temples. Archaeologists have found jokes, crude sketches, even sarcastic complaints like "this wall was hard." Turns out job-related humor has always been timeless. You can't help but grin, imagining a scribe chuckling quietly while the overseer's back was turned. Now, move a little closer to the engraving. See those faint circular marks? That's where the stonecutter outlined letters with a compass before carving them. Precision was everything. The Greeks used thin metal styluses to trace guidelines, ensuring each character was perfectly aligned. Some of the more skilled ones didn't even need to mark. They carved by eye, guided by muscle memory and years of repetition. Historians still debate whether certain temple inscriptions were the work of a single master or a coordinated team, each person responsible for a handful of lines. Either way, the consistency is uncanny, almost mechanical. And yet, even stone wasn't enough for everyone. Metal joined the writing family early on, especially for portable or ceremonial texts. Lead tablets were popular for curses. Yes, actual curses. You'd scratch your enemy's name into a sheet of lead, fold it up, and bury it in a grave or throw it down a well. Apparently, the gods preferred the postal service of the underworld. The messages were short, direct, and frankly, kind of passive-aggressive. May Marcus never win another chariot race. Simple, efficient, petty. On the nobler side, bronze plaques carried treaties, laws, and dedications. Some were coated in gold leaf, not for vanity, but to resist corrosion. When you touch one of these relics now, the letters are raised ever so slightly, like veins of memory. They gleam in torchlight, whispering secrets of forgotten cities. You realize that writing was never just about communication. It was also a way to claim space in the universe. You try to imagine what a scribe meant in this world of stone and metal. He wasn't a fragile scholar hunched over parchment. He was a craftsman, part writer, part sculptor, part engineer. His quill was a chisel, his ink was dust, and his words heavy, eternal. To him, beauty wasn't in the flow of a sentence, but in the perfect depth of a groove. He didn't write quickly. He wrote forever. Your hands ache just thinking about it. The rhythmic pounding, day after day. You wonder what that does to a person's body. The calluses, the bent spine, the sore shoulders. Maybe that's why so many ancient builders depicted themselves with offerings to gods of rest and healing. You picture one finally sitting back, wiping sweat from his brow and staring at his completed work. Maybe he smiled faintly, proud and tired. Then he packed up his tools and went home to a quiet meal, unaware that thousands of years later, someone, you, would still be tracing those same letters. As the sun sets, you look around. The dust hangs in the air like golden smoke. Every blow of the chisel feels distant now, like the heartbeat of time itself. You can't help but think, these were people who believed in permanence. In a world where papyrus could burn and clay could shatter, stone and metal offered a kind of immortality ink could never promise. But of course, nothing lasts forever. Even stone erodes, even bronze fades. The inscriptions you touch are weathered, incomplete, bits of words lost to rain and wind. Still, the fragments whisper enough to remind you of their makers, the scribes of stone and metal, the artists of endurance. You take one last look before leaving, brushing a bit of dust from an old inscription. The letters catch the fading light. For a moment, they seem to glow, not from pigment, but from memory itself. The air shifts as you move eastward, trading the stone dust of the Mediterranean for the soft hush of silk and brush. You find yourself standing in a quiet Chinese study, surrounded by scrolls that seem to breathe when the lantern light flickers. Everything here feels gentler, quieter, as though the act of writing has become a kind of meditation. The tools before you aren't harsh chisels or heavy mallets, but delicate instruments with the elegance of ritual. A smooth inkstone, a small porcelain water pot, sticks of solid ink, and brushes that rest like sleeping animals. You reach for a brush. Its handle is bamboo, its bristles pure white goat hair, impossibly soft. It's light as air, almost untrustworthy in your hand after all that hammering and carving. When you press the bristles to your palm, they bend fluidly, like the tail of a cat. This, you realize, is not a tool of force, it's a tool of flow. Every stroke must be guided by breath, by patience. A scholar sits across from you, robed in pale linen. He grinds a black ink stick against the surface of the stone with slow, circular motions, adding droplets of water from a tiny gourd. The sound is rhythmic, a soft, grainy whisper. You watch the ink thicken, darken, and finally gleam like polished obsidian. There's something soothing about it. The scholar glances up and says nothing, but you understand. The preparation of the ink is part of the writing itself. You're not supposed to rush it. Historians still argue whether this ritualized slowness was meant purely for concentration or if it carried spiritual significance. Perhaps it was both. Writing in ancient China wasn't just record-keeping. It was communion with order and harmony, a way to align mind and hand with the universe. You can almost feel the calm settling in your chest as you watch. When he begins to write, the brush moves with deliberate grace, leaving lines that shift from thick to thin with each breath. The ink glides over silk, not paper, the early kind, woven tight and faintly translucent. The characters bloom across it like living things. You lean closer and notice that each stroke ends with a subtle flick, a rhythm that feels like music written in silence. The scholar pauses occasionally, not to rest, but to contemplate. writing is not a race here. It's a slow exhale. The fact that they used silk before paper might surprise you. It seems extravagant, and it was. But silk was smooth, resilient, and accepted ink without bleeding. In those early centuries, only the elite could afford to record their thoughts this way. Imagine trying to keep your grocery list on a fabric worth its weight in silver. Of course, you probably wouldn't survive the imperial tax collector's opinion of that. Then came paper. Simple, humble, miraculous paper. Legend credits its invention to Kai Luan in the Han Dynasty around 105 CE, though fragments found earlier suggest he might have perfected rather than invented it. Either way, the change was revolutionary. No more heavy silk scrolls or bamboo strips. Suddenly, thoughts could travel lighter, farther, faster. Imagine a scribe realizing he could carry entire libraries in a single satchel. Humanity's memory, once bound to stone, was now as portable as the wind. You dip your brush into the ink and try a few characters yourself. It's harder than it looks. The brush reacts to every tremor in your wrist, every hesitation in your breath. A single stroke can make or break meaning. One misplaced line, and you might have just written horse instead of mother, an ancient student's nightmare. The scholar beside you smiles faintly as you fumble. He doesn't correct you, though. The brush, he says softly, teaches its own lessons. There's a faint fragrance in the air, resin, pine soot, and the ghost of burnt incense. The ink sticks were often perfumed to make the practice pleasant, as if writing itself was meant to engage all senses. You realize that this was the first time writing became truly art. The Chinese didn't separate calligraphy from language. Beauty and meaning were the same. To write beautifully was to think beautifully. A quirky tidbit you might enjoy: some poets would intentionally splash or drip ink to create textures resembling landscapes or clouds, claiming it helped the spirit of the words breathe better. There's even a legend of a monk who wrote sutras with water instead of ink, believing that the act itself, though invisible, would still be recorded in heaven. A bit impractical for office memos, but lovely in concept. You watch as the scholar rolls up a finished scroll and ties it with a silk cord. The paper still smells faintly of ink and time. He places it carefully inside a lacquered case where dozens of others rest like sleeping dragons. You wonder how many lives, philosophies, and dreams are contained within. Thousands of years later, we still find these scrolls intact, ink unchanged, strokes as confident as the day they were drawn. It's humbling how something so fragile could outlast empires. Your mind drifts to Japan and Korea, where the art of brush and ink took new forms. The Japanese kana scripts, flowing and curved, evolved from Chinese characters, like musical variations on a theme. Monks would copy sutras as acts of devotion, not for preservation, but for enlightenment. Imagine that, writing not to remember, but to awaken. The sound of brush on paper became a meditation, a heartbeat. Even now, some modern calligraphers say that each stroke is a reflection of the soul's current state. You can't fake calm in ink, it always shows. Historians still debate whether this cross-cultural evolution happened through trade routes or traveling monks, but either way, the tools remained constant: brush, ink, paper, patience, a trinity of stillness. And yet, for all its serenity, the act of writing wasn't always peaceful. Bureaucrats in imperial courts churned out reports by the thousands, their wrists cramping, their eyes burning in lamplight. The same brush that penned poetry could also sign death warrants or tax records. The tools themselves were neutral, only the intent gave them tone. You take another look at your own shaky characters. They're uneven, clumsy, too heavy-handed. But there's something personal about them. You realize that the brush responds to emotion more than technique. You can't bully it. You have to breathe with it. It's a humbling reminder that control and surrender often live side by side, not just in writing, but in life. The scholar dips his brush again, writing a short phrase in fluid strokes. You can't read the characters, but he translates softly: Ink is the shadow of the heart. You let that linger. Maybe every scribe, from the ones carving stone to those grinding ink, has been chasing the same thing, a way to let thought outlive flesh. Outside, a bamboo wind chime tinkles faintly. The air smells of rain now. You imagine hundreds of scribes through centuries, all bowing over their work in candlelight, breathing in sync with their strokes. Some wrote the laws that governed empires. Others wrote poems that still move strangers today. And all of them, whether in palaces or monasteries, used these same tools: brush, ink, paper. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the faint rustle of drying scrolls. It sounds like the ocean if you're tired enough. Maybe that's the real magic of it, the sound of knowledge settling quietly, like waves against the shore of time. You can almost drift off right here, surrounded by the soft perfume of ink and the endless whisper of silk. The scent of ink and paper lingers in your memory as you step into a new age, one of metal, molten lead, and clinking type. The world has shifted from the soft whispers of brushes on silk to the hard precision of the printing press. You can feel the difference immediately. The air is dense with oil and sawdust, with the faint tang of molten lead. There's a low mechanical hum that you can feel as much as hear, the heartbeat of a world moving faster, transforming words from unique creations into reproducible objects. In front of you is a press, towering and solid, its beams of oak scarred with decades of work. The operator adjusts a heavy screw, the smell of linseed oil coating his hands. Metal type sits in trays, each letter carved in reverse, waiting to be inked and pressed onto paper. You can almost hear the clatter of 1,000 presses across Europe, each one a tiny revolution in sound and knowledge. This is Gutenberg's legacy, though historians still argue whether he alone deserves full credit. Movable type had been experimented with in China and Korea centuries earlier, but the European innovation was transformative. Suddenly, ideas could spread quickly, across distances that once took months to traverse via scribes or messengers. You feel the energy in the room, not loud, but potent, like the quiet building of a storm. You run your fingers along a set of individual letters. They are small, hard, precise, and cool to the touch. There's an elegance in the uniformity, a contrast to the flowing unpredictability of ink on paper or brush on silk. Yet, for all their rigidity, these letters are filled with potential. Each one, once inked, carries the power to educate, to provoke, to delight, or to annoy. You imagine a scholar in Venice, arranging letters to print a philosophical treatise, fingers trembling with anticipation, aware that each line could reach hundreds, maybe thousands, of readers. The press operator demonstrates the process. He inks the letters with a leather-covered roller, carefully pressing the surface until it gleams with black pigment. Then the paper is laid gently atop the type. The press is tightened and the plate lowered. You can feel the tension in the screw, the resistance as wood meets metal. When it lifts, the impression is perfect, crisp, deep, uniform. The sensation is oddly satisfying, tactile even, though the result is visual. You might find yourself mesmerized by it, like watching a painter's brushstroke, but magnified and multiplied by hundreds at once. Some early printers used slightly different recipes for their ink, mixing soot, linseed oil, and even tree resins. Some batches dried too quickly, others too slowly. Certain presses reportedly had favorite ink recipes, and operators could tell whose batch it was by smell alone. Imagine sniffing ink like wine, trying to discern subtle variations. You'd probably never survive that level of attention to detail without a few headaches and messy fingers. You notice that the type must be arranged in reverse. Each letter is mirrored and every word aligned carefully so that when pressed, it reads correctly. One slip, one inverted character, and the page becomes nonsense. There's a strange tension here. Permanence mates chance. Despite the rigid metal, the process is still human, reliant on careful hands and vigilant eyes. Historians still argue whether printing improved accuracy in texts or simply spread errors faster, a reminder that every technological advance carries its own set of complications. You dip your finger lightly into ink, careful not to smudge. It feels sticky and viscous. The smell is rich and earthy. You press it onto a scrap sheet of paper and lift. The mark is uneven but tangible, a reminder that even in an era of mass production, every act of writing retains a human fingerprint. It's a strange mix of control and spontaneity. Nearby, a compositor arranges lines of type for a page of psalms. His motions are repetitive but rhythmical, almost meditative. You notice how carefully he selects each letter, how he pauses to check spacing and alignment. There's artistry here, despite the mechanical nature of the process. The page will not just convey words, it will carry a visual cadence, a subtle music of form and function. Some printers even experimented with typefaces, trying to emulate the flowing hand of scribes or the formal elegance of calligraphy. Gothic, Roman, Italic, each had its personality. You can imagine someone in the back room meticulously carving punches, feeling a peculiar satisfaction as a curve matches his aesthetic sense. There's artistry in precision. You think of it as the poetry of reproducibility. You walk over to a stack of finished pages, still warm from the press. The ink glistens slightly under candlelight. Each sheet is identical, yet no two hands have touched them in quite the same way. Tiny variations, a smudge, a press that caught slightly off center, remain, evidence of the human element behind the mechanical. It's comforting, in a strange way, that perfection is impossible, even here. The operator demonstrates another process, using a coin key to tighten the press, adjusting pressure. You realize that every printed page is the product of multiple tools interacting: type, ink, roller, press, paper, hands. No single element can do it alone. You can almost hear the faint ghost of earlier scribes, reeds, wax tablets, quills, nodding approvingly. They might not have had this power, but their rhythm lives on in the careful alignment of each letter. Outside, the sound of the city has changed. Horses clatter over cobblestones, merchants call from the stalls, and yet there's a quiet power in this little workshop. Words are no longer trapped on fragile pages or flowing slowly by hand. They can travel, multiply, influence. A small idea now has the potential to become a movement, and it all starts with these simple tools: a press, metal type, ink, and patient hands. As you handle a page of freshly pressed text, you notice the tactile impression of the letters under your fingers. You press lightly, feeling the subtle depth of each character. It's like tracing the history of communication, layer by layer. Here, permanence and reproduction meet, bridging centuries of scribal craft. You realize that no matter the medium, reed, quill, brush, chisel, or type, the goal remains the same: to capture thought and give it form. The room hums with quiet energy. You can almost sense the legacy of Gutenberg's workshop reaching across time, influencing every office, study, and classroom to come. And somewhere in that hum, you can still hear the faint echo of a scribe's voice, the steady rhythm of thought made tangible, the patient marking of a world's memory. You step out of the press room and into a dimly lit Victorian study, where polished wood glows softly in the light of a single gas lamp. The scent of ink, paper, and a faint tang of metal greets you immediately, but it's different this time: warmer, more refined, and tinged with the faint aroma of varnish. Here, writing has moved yet again, evolving with industry and imagination. This is the era of fountain pens and steel nibs, where elegance and precision are fused into a single instrument. On the desk before you rests a fountain pen, its barrel dark polished ebonite, gleaming faintly in the lamplight. It looks deceptively simple, a tube with a metal tip, but its sophistication is immediately apparent. You pick it up. It's heavier than a quill, but lighter than a hammer. Balanced perfectly in your hand, the pen invites you to write slowly, deliberately. This is a tool designed for flow, for rhythm, for continuous thought without the interruption of dipping into an inkwell every few words. The fountain pen's nib is a marvel of engineering. Delicate steel or gold, shaped with a slight point and a split down the center, it channels ink smoothly from an internal reservoir to paper. You press it lightly to a sheet and the ink flows effortlessly, leaving lines that are consistent, bold, and infinitely more forgiving than the brush or quill. It feels strange at first, like being handed the modern equivalent of a scribe's dream, but there's still artistry in controlling it. Too much pressure and the nib flexes, spreading ink unevenly. Too little and the flow stutters. You realize instantly why people spend lifetimes mastering it. The history behind the fountain pen is as fascinating as its use. Early versions appeared in the late 17th century, but widespread adoption didn't happen until the 19th century, when industrial techniques made them reliable and accessible. Before this, scribes endured quill sharpening, messy ink pots, and countless spills. Now, ink could be stored inside the pen itself, and writing became a smoother, more continuous act. Historians still argue whether the fountain pen truly revolutionized writing habits or merely refined existing practices, but you can't help noticing that the world suddenly writes faster, cleaner, and with less strain. You take the pen to a piece of warm, thick paper, the kind used for letters and ledgers. There's a subtle texture beneath your hand, a friction that feels both soothing and necessary. You begin to write. The nib glides like a dancer across a stage, leaving behind lines that speak of intention. Unlike the quill, there's no need for constant adjustment. The pen responds to thought directly. It's almost intimate, like the pen is listening and echoing your mind. A quirky fact emerges as you practice. Early fountain pens often leaked, occasionally splattering ink across important documents. Some users even devised elaborate ink safety clothing, capes or protective sleeves to keep their garments clean. Imagine attending a formal dinner, only to leave behind a trail of dark ink like a modern abstract artist. You grin, imagining the social embarrassment and the relief that modern seals and cartridges would eventually eliminate such chaos. Next, you notice the evolution in nibs. Some are fine, perfect for precise ledger work or tiny annotations. Others are broad, designed for bold signatures and dramatic letter forms. You hold a broad nib and feel the subtle resistance as the ink spreads generously, creating lines that seem to command attention. In Victorian times, signatures weren't mere scribbles. They were a mark of identity and authority. People practiced them meticulously, and the fountain pen enabled a flourish that a quill could rarely sustain without faltering. You set the broad nib aside and focus again on the finer tip. You can feel the history of correspondence flowing back through your fingers. Letters once took weeks to deliver. Now they flowed more smoothly, more elegantly. The pen became not only a professional instrument, but a personal companion, capable of conveying both clarity and emotion. Even today, we admire the art of a well-written letter, a luxury that the fountain pen facilitated, allowing thoughts to unfurl with grace. The ink itself is a whole world of wonder. Victorian inks were rich, dark, and often scented with aromatic compounds. Some were waterproof, others had a slight shimmer. Writers could experiment endlessly, creating visual moods alongside textual content. You can't help but think of poets and novelists sitting by candlelight, adjusting the nib to coax just the right line of sentiment onto the page. Historians still argue whether the pen inspired creativity or merely enabled the meticulous transcription of existing thought, but the connection between hand and mind is undeniable. You dip the pen once more, the reservoir humming faintly as it releases ink. The line flows effortlessly now, like a small river across the paper. You begin to write, imagining yourself in the quiet of a Victorian office or library. There's a soft ticking of a clock somewhere, a faint hiss of a coal fire in the grate. Outside, the city hums quietly, but here, in this small, lamplit sanctuary, time slows. Writing becomes a meditation, a rhythm you follow with hand, wrist, and thought. Occasionally, the nib catches on a tiny imperfection in the paper. You pause, adjust, and continue. A reminder that even advanced tools are sensitive to materials, skill, and attention. The fountain pen demands mindfulness, though in a way more forgiving than the quill or chisel. Mistakes are less permanent. Corrections can be made, though ideally you strive for elegance. You think of it as the bridge between permanence and flexibility, a compromise between the rigidity of carved stone and the fleeting nature of wax tablets. A small smile touches your lips as you imagine all the hands that held such pens. Scholars drafting philosophical treatises, clerks keeping meticulous accounts, lovers writing letters in dimly lit chambers. The fountain pen democratized writing in subtle ways. It became a tool of learning, expression, and creativity. You wonder if people today fully appreciate that simple joy, the effortless connection between thought, hand, and ink. As you lay the pen down, you notice the faint sheen of dried ink on the nib, a subtle reminder of work done and ideas committed. It's humble, elegant, and quietly powerful. You realize that writing has always been about more than words. It's about connection, endurance, and expression. From reeds to wax, quills to brushes, and now to metal and steel nibs, every tool reflects its age, while passing on the essence of thought. You lean back and watch the soft glow of lamplight over the polished wood desk. Each tool in this lineage, from reed to pen, has transformed how humans think, communicate, and remember. Yet all of them share one truth. The act of writing is intimate, deliberate, and profoundly human. Your fingers still feel the trace of ink, the faint resistance of the nib, the soft friction of paper, a tactile memory of centuries of scribes, clerks, and thinkers. Somewhere outside, the world continues in motion, but inside this quiet room, you feel suspended, tethered to a lineage of hands and minds that have shaped, recorded, and preserved thought. And as the lamplight flickers, you sense the gentle rhythm of history itself, flowing endlessly through the tip of a pen. The warm glow of the Victorian study fades as you step into a brighter, more industrialized world. You find yourself in a modern office, a quiet hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the faint whir of machines in the background. Here, writing has evolved again, from the intimacy of a fountain pen to the efficiency of typewriters and early mechanical word processors. You run your fingers across a smooth wooden desk and spot a typewriter waiting patiently, its keys glinting under the soft office light. You lift the carriage and press a key. There's a satisfying clack, a tactile punch that travels through your fingertips into your bones. The type bar strikes the inked ribbon and leaves a crisp imprint on the paper, a tangible, immediate record of thought. It's nothing like the soft glide of a quill or the flowing brushstroke of Chinese ink. It's deliberate, mechanical, yet in its own way elegant. Each character is uniform, precise, and permanent, at least until the next line is typed. The typewriter was born of necessity. Handwriting, even with fountain pens, was slow and prone to error. Clerks, journalists, and authors needed a tool that could produce legible, consistent text quickly. Christopher Latham Scholes in the 1860s created the first commercially successful machine, forever changing the act of writing. Historians still argue whether the typewriter primarily enhanced literacy or simply sped up bureaucratic labor, but there's no denying its impact. You can almost hear the echoes of offices past, the steady rhythm of keys, the click-clack of thoughts committed to paper. You run your hands along the keyboard. Each key has a subtle resistance, a spring that bounces back instantly after striking the paper. The letters are arranged in QWERTY, a layout that feels intuitive today, but was originally designed to prevent jamming of mechanical arms. Imagine typing with lightning speed and having your machine seize. Frustrating, yes, but also a clever workaround for early engineering limitations. You smile at the irony. Speed had to be limited to maintain continuity. Efficiency with a built-in brake. A quirky fact developed finger calluses in unusual shapes because of prolonged typing, almost like a badge of honor. One 19th century journalist reportedly had distinct ridges on her fingertips, proof that dedication to the written word leaves marks beyond ink. You probably wouldn't survive the modern office without ergonomic breaks, but back then, pain and endurance were simply part of the ritual. You pull a fresh sheet of paper into the roller and begin typing. The sound is mesmerizing. Click, clack, click, clack, a mechanical heartbeat. It's a rhythm that occupies both mind and body, a cadence that almost hypnotizes. You type a simple sentence, feel the carriage move, and then hit the return lever. The line advances, and the next begins seamlessly. There's a meditative quality to this repetitive motion, a discipline that mirrors earlier scribes' meticulous care, but with a new energy, faster, louder, more deliberate. The ribbon is essential. Ink-soaked fabric stretches across the type bars, transferring pigment efficiently onto the page. Unlike fountain pens, which required careful pressure and flow control, the typewriter ribbon ensures consistency. You imagine a clerk filling out hundreds of forms in a single day, the ink never failing, the letters never smudging. And yet, mistakes are permanent, or at least conspicuous. No easy blotting, no whiteout pens yet. Each slip requires careful correction. Historians still debate whether the typewriter encouraged precision in writing or promoted mechanical, emotionless prose. Perhaps both, depending on the hands that guided the keys. Nearby, you notice a vintage adding machine and carbon paper, artifacts of office life from another era. Carbon paper enabled multiple copies, a primitive precursor to modern printers. The idea of duplication feels familiar now, but for early typists, it was revolutionary. They could create multiple records of correspondence, invoices, or manuscripts simultaneously, ensuring that information persisted beyond a single sheet. You can almost feel the satisfaction of knowing that your words exist in several places at once, a kind of distributed immortality. You pause to consider the physicality of typing. Unlike quills or brushes, the typewriter demands precise finger placement and pressure. Each strike is a tiny burst of energy transferred directly to the page. There's no room for flourish or whimsy in the letters themselves. Personality shows in phrasing, spacing, and choice of words. Typing, in its own way, returns focus to the intellectual act of writing, rather than the aesthetics of the letters. A curious anecdote emerges. Some authors developed typewriter calligraphy, using the keys to create patterns and illustrations. Rows of X's, O's, and slashes became geometric art, a playful rebellion against uniformity. You smile, imagining someone sneaking these small designs into reports or letters. Even in mechanized writing, human creativity finds a way to peek through. As you type, you reflect on the broader significance. The typewriter didn't just change how people wrote, it changed who could write. Women, previously excluded from many forms of professional correspondence, found employment as typists, gaining independence and agency. Scholars could disseminate research faster. Authors could draft novels more efficiently. The act of writing became democratized in a new way. You glance down at the paper. The text is crisp, uniform, and tactile. You run a finger over the raised impressions, subtle yet permanent. It reminds you of carved stone inscriptions, though on a much smaller scale. The rhythm of typing, the discipline required, and the physical connection to words all echo the same principles as centuries of scribes before: patience, precision, and intention. Outside the window, city noises filter in: horse-drawn carriages, early automobiles, people moving quickly through cobblestone streets. Inside, the typewriter creates its own microcosm of order and calm. You feel the continuity of history pressing in: reeds, quills, brushes, fountain pens, presses, and now keys, each a step in the evolution of human thought made tangible. The carriage returns one last time, leaving a blank line at the top of the page. You stop typing and breathe, feeling the satisfaction of words captured, impressions made, and rhythm maintained. For all the mechanization, you notice the human hand is still central, shaping, guiding, and animating text. It's a reminder that every tool, no matter how sophisticated, ultimately depends on thought and care. You set the typewriter down gently. Its keys glint faintly in the lamplight, a mechanical echo of centuries of scribes, scholars, and clerks. You realize that, in a way, the typewriter embodies a marriage between permanence and productivity, speed and precision. And as you sit quietly, listening to the faint hum of the office, you feel the lineage of writing extend forward, an unbroken chain of hands, tools, and ideas stretching from ancient reeds to the present moment. You step into a softly lit room filled with the gentle glow of screens and the quiet hum of modern electronics. The air smells faintly of plastic, ozone, and recycled coffee cups, a far cry from ink, parchment, and polished wood. Here, the tools of writing are no longer strictly physical. Keyboards, touchscreens, styluses, and digital pads dominate the landscape. You run your fingers over a sleek laptop keyboard, its keys quiet and responsive. The evolution of writing has taken yet another leap, trading mechanical force for electronic precision. The moment your fingers touch the keys, you feel a strange familiarity and alienness at the same time. The clack of the typewriter has been replaced by a soft, almost weightless tap. Letters appear on a screen instantly, editable and flexible, almost ephemeral. Unlike ink, fountain pens, or chisels, these marks aren't permanent, at least not in the physical sense. Yet they carry infinite potential, the ability to copy, send, share, and preserve across networks and continents. You marvel at the contrast. One misstroke with a quill might have been disastrous, but a single keystroke can now be undone with a tap. Digital tools have democratized writing in ways unimaginable to earlier scribes. Anyone with a keyboard and internet connection can record thoughts, publish stories, or keep meticulous records. Historians still argue whether this immediacy dilutes the craft of writing or simply changes the way we perceive it. Yet there's no denying that the keyboard has become the modern scribe's indispensable companion. The clack is soft, the letters uniform, and mistakes correctable in real time. There's efficiency here that would have astonished even a master printer from the 15th century. You pick up a stylus and hover over a tablet, tracing an imaginary line. The screen reacts instantly, translating pressure, angle, and speed into visible strokes. This feels closer to the brush or quill than the keyboard ever did. The flexibility allows for both precision and expression, a digital bridge between mechanical and artistic writing. You draw a few letters, noticing the subtleties of tilt and pressure. It's almost hypnotic. Each stroke leaves a trace of your intent, ephemeral yet visible, immediate yet lasting. A quirky detail emerges. Digital ink and styluses have led to new forms of art and shorthand. Designers and students develop symbols, emojis, and sketches directly in their documents, blending visual and textual storytelling. Even in a world of pure data, the human impulse to decorate, annotate, and personalize persists. You imagine the scribes of old smiling faintly at this. Still doodling, I see. The software itself is a tool too. Spell checkers, grammar suggestions, formatting assistants, each one influences the flow and structure of modern writing. Unlike previous tools that were passive, digital tools actively guide your words. You can type in multiple languages, insert images, adjust layouts instantly. Historians still argue whether such automation improves literacy or dulls stylistic skill. You pause for a moment, aware that every generation wrestles with its tools, questioning whether convenience comes at the cost of artistry. You begin to type, the letters forming smoothly on the screen. Words appear precisely where intended. You notice that unlike paper or ink, mistakes can be erased without a trace. There's a strange intimacy in this. The thought flows freely, less burdened by permanence. And yet, the impermanence can make the act feel fleeting, almost ghost-like. You remember ancient scribes pressing reeds or chisels into a medium that would last centuries. Here, your words can disappear with a click or a crash. The responsibility and gravity feel different, though creativity feels liberated. Digital tools also allow for collaboration on an unprecedented scale. Writers across continents can edit the same document in real time, sharing thought as fluidly as ink once flowed on a shared scroll. Comments, tracked changes, and hyperlinks extend the possibilities of storytelling and record-keeping. You imagine a medieval scribe trying to comprehend this. Hundreds of hands touching the same text without a single ink stain. It's almost magical. You notice the subtle ergonomics of modern keyboards and tablets. Typing is gentle, designed to minimize strain, unlike the relentless motion required by a typewriter or the chisel's repeated pounding. Even posture and wrist support have become part of the craft. The tools adapt to the human body rather than demanding it bend to their needs. A fountain pen required training, a typewriter required endurance, but a keyboard, if used wisely, is forgiving. The cloud is your parchment now. Words travel instantaneously, stored in invisible servers, retrievable from any corner of the globe. You type a sentence and imagine it reflected across cities, continents, languages. Digital permanence, though invisible, rivals any carved stone or printed page. There's a strange comfort in this. The scribe's legacy is no longer constrained by geography, material, or time. And yet, you're aware that technology is fragile, reliant on electricity, code, and networks, ephemeral in its own way. A quirky tidbit, some programmers use a technique called ASCII art, composing elaborate images using only characters on a keyboard. It's a playful echo of ancient scribes carving symbols into stone or scratching graffiti into walls. The human urge to leave a mark, decorative or functional, persists across tools and eras. You smile, realizing that every era leaves both its practical records and its whimsical traces. You switch back to the stylus, drawing fluid strokes on the tablet. There's a tactile satisfaction, despite the screen's smoothness. Pressure sensitivity mimics brush or quill, and you realize that the essence of writing, the extension of thought into a visible medium, remains unchanged, even if the medium itself has become digital. It's continuity in evolution. The lineage of scribes lives on through silicon and code. Outside, the hum of the city has intensified. Traffic, chatter, music spilling from windows. Yet inside this quiet room, the act of writing persists, timeless and meditative. Your fingers move, your thoughts flow, and despite the invisible medium, there's a resonance with every scribe before you, from reeds to brushes, chisels to fountain pens, typewriters to keyboards. Each tool shaped the rhythm of human expression, each innovation expanding the boundaries of what it means to write. You pause and watch the glowing screen. Letters, symbols, images, they all exist at once, yet can vanish with a single command. The power is exhilarating, subtle, and a little humbling. The legacy of scribes is still here. Human thought rendered visible, preserved, and shared, now through circuits instead of ink, light instead of pigment, keys instead of quills. And as your hands hover over the keyboard, you realize that the story of writing is not about the tools alone, but about the enduring human desire to make thought tangible, lasting, and meaningful. The gentle glow of your screen fades as you move into a space that feels almost surreal, a hybrid of physical and digital realms. Here, writing is no longer confined to paper, parchment, or even screens. It has expanded into tablets that mimic paper, digital pens that respond to pressure and tilt, and voice recognition software that transforms your spoken words into text with uncanny accuracy. The evolution of scribal tools has reached a point where thought and expression can travel faster than ever, yet remain remarkably intimate. You pick up a stylus, its surface cool and light in your hand. It feels alive in a way the fountain pen never did. The screen beneath responds instantly, translating your smallest movements into precise strokes, curves, and dots. There's a subtle vibration, a tactile echo of motion, making you feel connected to the digital ink as if it were flowing through your veins. Unlike a mechanical typewriter or a chisel, this tool seems to anticipate your intent, allowing creativity and accuracy to exist simultaneously. Digital ink, stylus technology, and tablet sensitivity have transformed the very act of writing into a performance. Each stroke is responsive, nuanced, and layered with feedback that older tools could only dream of. Historians still argue whether such technology enhances literacy or creates a reliance on automation, but you can't help feeling that this tool merges the art and efficiency of writing like never before. There's no waiting for ink to dry, no fear of a blot. Mistakes can be corrected seamlessly, yet every stroke remains visible as evidence of thought. You imagine a modern scribe at work. Instead of a workshop of chisels or a Victorian study of fountain pens, they occupy a quiet room with a digital tablet, an ergonomic chair, and a library of fonts and textures at their fingertips. They sketch diagrams, annotate notes, write poetry, and craft long-form narratives without the interruption of refilling ink or arranging type. Everything exists in layers, editable, malleable, and yet tangible, a paradox that earlier scribes would have marveled at. A quirky fact, some artists and writers use digital tools to simulate ancient calligraphy or ink effects, deliberately choosing brushes that emulate bamboo, quills, or brushes soaked in handmade ink. They replicate the imperfections of handcraft digitally, preserving the spirit of tradition while embracing the convenience of modern tools. You smile, imagining a scribe of ancient Mesopotamia peeking over your shoulder and nodding in approval. At least they got the strokes right. The tools themselves are evolving constantly. Haptic feedback, variable pressure sensitivity, and stylus tilt detection allow for subtleties that rival traditional mediums. You notice the tiniest variations in line thickness as you move the stylus, the digital ink spreading in a way that feels eerily natural. It's intimate and precise, a perfect blend of hand and technology. You pause, appreciating the sheer ingenuity. Humans have managed to preserve the tactile joy of writing even in a digital age. You begin to write, your movements deliberate and meditative. Unlike a keyboard, where each key is uniform and mechanical, the stylus responds to your personal touch. Your thoughts flow naturally, almost like a conversation between mind and medium. The experience bridges centuries. The meditative quality recalls Chinese brush calligraphy. The precision evokes fountain pens, and the speed mirrors the efficiency of typewriters. All of it is condensed into a single instrument that feels effortless yet profound. You speak a few sentences aloud, and they appear on the screen in perfect clarity. The technology is astonishing, capturing tone, cadence, and even punctuation. A historian might still argue whether speaking your thoughts counts as writing, but it's clear that these tools expand the very definition of scribal work. Words are no longer bound to hands or quills. They flow directly from mind to text. The continuity of human thought remains, but the method of expression has adapted, accelerated, and multiplied. You glance around the room and notice hybrid tools layered over paper-like textures, digital pens with programmable nibs, and styluses that simulate the friction of ink on parchment. Even the ambient lighting adjusts automatically, reducing eye strain and encouraging prolonged focus. Writing has become a total sensory experience, combining sight, touch, and even slight auditory feedback, the faint scratch of digital ink echoing the ancient satisfaction of quills and brushes. A quirky anecdote, some digital calligraphers intentionally introduce glitches or imperfections into their strokes to mimic the natural variability of handcraft. These subtle choices reflect a recognition that imperfection conveys humanity, a reminder that writing, no matter how advanced, thrives on the interplay of skill, intention, and personal expression. You probably wouldn't survive the perfectionist's temptation to remove every irregularity, but the charm of imperfection remains timeless. You pause and observe the legacy embedded in these modern tools. The stylus and tablet may feel futuristic, but they carry the echoes of every reed, brush, nib, and key pressed across centuries. Each digital stroke is a descendant of chisels striking stone, quills scratching parchment, and type bars punching letters. You feel connected to a continuum of human thought, the lineage of scribes reaching forward even as the tools evolve beyond imagination. Outside, the world moves faster than ever. Emails, messages, and texts fly across continents in seconds. Yet within this quiet room, you experience the meditative rhythm of writing as profoundly as any ancient scribe or calligrapher. The tools have changed, but the essence remains, capturing thought, making it tangible, and leaving a trace of human presence in the world. You set the stylus down and look at your screen. Each stroke, line, and word feels like a bridge between past and present, a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of countless generations. Writing has always been more than communication. It's endurance, reflection, and artistry. And as you breathe, the quiet hum of technology blends seamlessly with the echo of history, a reminder that the story of tools is inseparable from the story of the human mind. The room grows quieter as you lean back, taking in the subtle hum of devices around you. You've traversed millennia of scribal history, from reeds pressed into clay to styluses gliding over digital screens, and yet the essence of writing remains unchanged. Each tool you've touched has shaped thought, expression, and the very way humans engage with ideas. Even the most advanced technology, for all its speed and precision, is a continuation of the same impulse that led someone long ago to scratch symbols into stone or smear ink across silk. You run your fingers lightly over a tablet, feeling the smooth glass beneath your touch. The digital ink responds instantly, curving, thickening, and fading with your movements. You pause, appreciating how much control the modern scribe possesses. Unlike chisels, brushes, or fountain pens, mistakes can be reversed, strokes adjusted, even colors altered. There's a freedom here that previous generations could scarcely imagine, yet there's also responsibility. Words travel faster, last longer, and reach more eyes than ever before. Every choice matters. As your hand rests on the stylus, your mind drifts back to the scribes of the past. You remember the Egyptian scribes scraping reed pens across papyrus, the Chinese scholar grinding ink, the medieval monk illuminating manuscripts with care, and the Victorian clerk perfecting his fountain pen flourish. Each generation wrestled with the same tension: permanence versus impermanence, labor versus leisure, expression versus accuracy. The tools changed, the rhythm shifted, but the heart of writing, the intimate dialogue between hand and thought, endured. A quirky detail surfaces in your memory. Medieval scribes sometimes wrote in invisible ink or used complex codes to protect sensitive information. The digital age echoes this with encryption and password-protected documents. Across centuries, the principle remains: safeguarding ideas is as important as recording them. And whether carved in stone, written on paper, or encoded in digital clouds, the desire to preserve thought has persisted with unwavering intensity. You notice how physicality continues to influence writing. Even with a stylus, the slight resistance of glass, the angle of your wrist, and the pressure of your fingers shape your words. Technology has softened the constraints of older tools, but it hasn't eliminated the need for attention and care. Writing remains tactile, deliberate, and deeply personal, whether on clay, parchment, or pixels. Historians still argue whether digital writing will cultivate the same depth of reflection as traditional media, but the lineage of thought carries forward, adapting to new tools with remarkable continuity. The wind outside taps lightly against the window, a gentle reminder that the world continues to move, even as you linger in this quiet sanctuary of creation. You reflect on the human hand's journey, from pressing clay to striking keys to gliding a stylus. Each tool has its own rhythm, its own lesson in patience and intention. Yet the ultimate act remains the same: turning thought into a lasting record, leaving a trace of existence for others to encounter. You take a moment to breathe deeply, letting the soft hum of modern machinery blend with the imagined clatter of typewriters, the whisper of brushes on silk, and the gentle scratch of quills. It's comforting, almost hypnotic, to feel that despite centuries of change, the act of writing remains a bridge connecting generations, minds, and civilizations. Every scribble, stroke, and keystroke is part of this continuum, a testament to human curiosity, ingenuity, and expression. Now, slowing your pace, you feel the rhythm of the day give way to night. Fingers relax, shoulders drop, and your mind softens. The tools, though extraordinary, no longer demand your full attention. Their purpose has been fulfilled. You imagine ancient scribes reclining after a day of careful work, the ink drying, the clay tablets stacked neatly, the scrolls rolled and tied. You sense their quiet satisfaction mirrored in your own experience, the awareness that each act of writing is a contribution to a vast, unfolding tapestry of knowledge. Let your thoughts drift gently to the evolution you've witnessed. From reeds to styluses, every tool shaped the way humans conceptualized ideas, communicated, and preserved memory. Each innovation reflects a leap in imagination, a step in the endless human journey of recording thought. And though the tools have changed, the joy of writing, of transforming the intangible into something tangible, remains timeless. The screen before you glows softly, the digital ink still visible, yet fading into the background as your eyelids grow heavy. You can feel the lineage of scribes settling around you like a gentle blanket, their centuries of dedication and ingenuity lending calm and continuity. The tools may change again in the future, but the impulse to record, to express, to leave a trace of oneself endures. Take a final deep breath. Let your shoulders loosen, your mind slow, your hands rest. Imagine the quiet of a scribe's workshop, the flicker of a candle, the soft rustle of paper or silk. You are part of this continuum now, a participant in a human story that stretches back thousands of years. And with each heartbeat, each gentle exhale, you feel a little closer to the calm, deliberate rhythm that has defined scribes across time. Let this gentle awareness accompany you as your thoughts drift into sleep. The lineage of writing like a soothing echo in the back of your mind. The tools may be gone in the morning, replaced by new ones, but the act of creation, the connection to human thought, remains eternal. Relax, breathe, and let the quiet hum of centuries of scribes lull you deeper into rest. Sweet dreams.